Hey, good morning, good afternoon, good evening, everyone. Thank you very much for tuning in to our Open Access Week panel. Uh, we're glad that you can join us today, just to make sure that everyone is in the right place that they have to be. The panel is Navigating Ethical Complexities, Open Access Data Sharing, DEI Considerations, and the Role of Generative AI. So, once again, thank you very much for joining. So a little bit before we get started, I'm Jay Patel. I'm the head of sales for Cactus Communications, um, and and so I'm actually focused on the Americas, and we have a really great panel today. But before we kick off with that, let me just tell you a little bit about Editage. So Editage is an offering by Cactus Communications. Cactus is a multinational company and has partnered with some of the leading names in academia and the life sciences from around the world. One of the parts of Editage is Editage Plus, and it's an all-in-one platform that simplifies the research and publishing process for academics. With over 20 plus years of experience, it combines our AI-powered tools and expert-led services to help researchers achieve faster, more impactful results. Um, and this package includes AI tools like PaperPal, which helps with real-time language suggestions for clear, concise writing, Mind the Graph, which easily creates scientific visuals with a drag and drop interface, um, and our discovery, which can help access a massive repository of scholarly content for quick literature searches. We also provide expert services, um, such as editing services. We also offer um, $35 off on 2 research papers with professional editing and formatting, unlimited re-editing for 365 days. You can also mark your favorite editor. And we also have learning resources where you can explore over 100 research skill courses to enhance academic writing, publishing, and career advancement. All right. So before we get started, a few housekeeping announcements. Webinar recording, we'll be sending you the link to the webinar recording via email. Keep an eye on your inbox in the coming weeks as you'll receive it soon. And please make sure to check your spam or junk folder in case it ends up there, or your quarantine folder. Um, for a certificate of attendance, if you like a certificate of attendance for this webinar, please stay on until the end. In the last 10 minutes of the session, we'll share a feedback form. You can use that form to request a certificate. And for questions for the panelists, if you have any questions for the panelists, please leave it in the Q&A box next to the chat option on your screen. We'll try to answer as many as we can. All right, so great. Now that we have all that taken care of, I would like to go ahead and introduce you to our panelists. Um, we will start first with Alice Meadows, who is co-founder of More Brains Cooperative. Alice, if you could introduce yourself, that'd be great.
Thanks. Yes, and first of all, thank you for the opportunity to be here. It's great to have a chance to celebrate Open Access Week with all of you, and hello everyone. As Jay says, I'm one of the co-founders of the More Brains Cooperative, which is a small scholarly communications consultancy. We've been in business for more or less exactly 4 years now. Before that, and a little bit overlapping with that, most of my background is in scholarly publishing, first at Blackwell Publishing and then at Wiley, and then I moved into more sort of research infrastructure, if you like. So I worked for ORCID, which hopefully many of you are familiar with, and then moved to NISO, the National Information Standards Organisation, where I did a lot of community engagement sort of work. I'm very passionate about diversity, equity, inclusion and accessibility. Happy to be able to have a chance to talk a little bit about that. I'm also very passionate about metadata, and my take today is going to be mostly focused on that rather than data sets and things like that. ORCID is an important component of metadata, which is, metadata, I'm sure you all know, but is data about data. So it's not the content of an article, for example, it's things like the author and the title and the date of publication and that kind of thing. That's who I am, where I'm coming from, and I'm looking forward to talking to you all.
Great. Thank you very much, Alice. Uh, Next, Ed Pants, who's the executive director of Crossref. Ed, if you'd like to introduce yourself, that'd be great.
Hello, yes, I'm Ed Pence. I'm Executive Director of Crossref, and I am involved in a number of aspects of what we call open scholarly infrastructure. So Crossref itself um, assigns metadata and provides services around capturing the scholarly record and persistent linking with persistent identifiers. And we started sort of in the area of uh, journal articles with the more formal publications, but research has been changing, and uh, we now capture many more types of content, and also data has become much more important. So we can hopefully talk about that some more today. And I've been involved also, along with Alice, with ORCID and on the ROAR, which is the organization identifiers, and also with the DOI Foundation, the Digital Object Identifier, and also very interested in equity and inclusion, both within the scholarly record and more broadly. So looking forward to the conversation today. Thank you.
Great. Thank you very much, Ed. Um, Last but not least, we have Jason Williams with us as well. He's the Assistant Director, Diversity and Research Readiness at DNA Learning Center. Jason,
Hi,
if you
thank
wanted
you.
to introduce yourself, that'd be great.
Yes, thanks everybody for the invitation. I'm in my mobile office today, right outside of a school that I'm about to visit. My name is Jason Williams. I'm at Cold Spring Harbor Laboratory, where I'm Assistant Director at the DNA Learning Center. I work on a number of projects, probably a bit closer to the researcher side and implementation and education, although one of my hats today is probably as the chair of the board of directors for Dryad, which is an open data publishing platform. So I'm very concerned with how data publication not only works in terms of infrastructure and being involved in building a number of projects for that, but really getting understanding of how researchers might use that, become aware of it. Um, uh, Actually, all of the human side of what needs to happen to make that infrastructure realize its full purpose. And in today's discussion, really understanding how we can make sure that that's an equitable affair. So thank you again for the invitation to be part of the panel.
Excellent. Thank you very much. And thank you for those introductions. All right. So, what I'd like to do is I would like to just start off by asking a few questions. But I did want to kind of explain that, I know right now there's a lot of talk, hype, excitement about generative AI and how it can help within research and authorship and all sorts of other areas. Uh, but we but we but we do have to remember that in order for Gen AI to actually do what it's doing, we need clean data, good data, and we need to collect that information in as ethical and fair manner as possible. Um, so I did want to start off by asking Alice, what do you see as the primary ethical challenges that you've observed in open access data sharing? Alice, did we lose you? All right. You know what? Let me. There we go. There's Alice.
I'm so sorry. I'm having some glitchy internet issues today. I'm really sorry about that. I couldn't unmute or turn my camera on. So, but I did hear the question, so I will try and answer it. As I said, I'm going to answer primarily from a metadata perspective, and in my view, excuse me, and Ed, without wanting to put words in your mouth, I suspect you agree with me on this. For the most part, I think there's no reason why most metadata shouldn't be open. That's not the case at the moment necessarily, but since metadata is data about the actual data or the content, a lot of that I think can and should be open. Obviously, there are exceptions to that, and I think a good example of that comes around Indigenous knowledge, where there is some information that is sacred to the people involved and which shouldn't be openly available in any way. And maybe that there shouldn't even be information about whatever object is being identified. So there certainly are exceptions. I think there are also exceptions, for example, in environmental fields. You know, if you're talking about somebody that some species that is close to extinction, you don't want to make it clear to everybody where that species is still surviving, so that people can come and you know, potentially kill it or whatever. So there are definitely exceptions, but for the most part, I think that, to quote the FAIR data principles, which maybe some of you are familiar with already, about making data findable, accessible, interoperable, and reusable. Data should be as open as possible and as closed as necessary. And I think if we keep that in mind from an ethics perspective, we probably won't go too far wrong. And just so you know, I'm not going to turn my camera or my mic off, just in case I get cut off again. So, but I will stay quiet.
Okay, thank you, Alice. Jason, Ed, do you have anything more to offer or build on to what Alice has said?
Well, you asked about, you know, the challenges, and there are so many. So maybe try to. I always will think, is there one that I could identify that is a little bit off center from what the usual conversation would be, and I hope others will pick up on the other really obvious ones. But I think right now with generative AI, the ethical concerns are around provenance and uncertainty. We don't know. We really, in most cases, don't know where the data are coming from. That might be the output of a generative AI process. We don't know how they were obtained. And in many cases, right, the situation is we don't know if AI is even being used or not unless it's being openly disclosed. So I think where that puts a lot of people, or where I could say myself, feeling very uncomfortable, is not knowing when I'm consuming some output. Was that actually generated by a human? Was it generated by an AI? And then where are the sources? There are things that are trying to fix that. But for me, that's a really important ethical challenge in so many dimensions. I'll stop talking soon, but one dimension, of course, is, you know, of course, as I think Alice was just saying, making sure that we're not making use of data that actually we don't have permission. But then the other one is also being limited in the use of generative AI, where it could be beneficial, but we don't want to use it because we are afraid of the potential ethical challenges being unresolved. So in both cases, there are really big challenges.
Yep. Great, thank you, Jason. And I know, Ed, in our conversations when we were planning this panel, I know you had some thoughts on some of these challenges with open access data sharing. It would be great if you could share some of your thoughts on this as well.
Oh, sorry, was that for me? Oh, yeah, sorry. I just missed the end there, but yeah, I'd just like to agree. Yeah, I agree with Alice and Jason, and particularly, I think it's really important to pick up on what Jason mentioned around provenance and being able to cite sources, because of course, with a lot of the AI applications, I think what I've in thinking about what I was going to sort of say today, it is difficult because it's so fundamental in so many things, and that there are positive uses of AI, but I do think the critical aspect is that provenance of where did the information come from, and I think that's partly where there can be bias, because if the training set of data that the AI is using has bias in it, then that's going to be reflected in the outputs. And if they're missing, if they're not ingesting certain types of data or indigenous knowledge, then that could just be missing entirely. But I do think one of the big ethical things is knowing when AI is being used, but also, you know, it's very difficult to know that what is coming out is actually accurate or even real. So you always have to double check it, because, you know, it does create fake citations. I don't want to use the word hallucination because that makes it seem like it's actually thinking, whereas it's just statistical abstraction, right? And it has no concept of whether something's correct or not. So it has this sort of false authority. And I think that's one of the ethical problems. But I do think there are specific applications. You know, if you're using a constrained data set uh, to get answers out of it, and you know what data has gone into it, then it could be very useful. You know, specific applications can be very useful. So I do think that I was looking up beforehand, and the OECD has come out with a paper on this, and they have some AI principles. And one of the things they say is about accountability. So I think that's really important with the ethical aspects of this, is that you should ensure traceability, including relation to data sets, but also the process and decision that went into the whole AI life cycle, and providing information, you know, about what went into the training. So I think that's really important.
And I'll just butt in quickly to say, and that's where metadata comes in. I think, you know, that's the provenance is exactly
Yeah.
the sort of information that should be contained in the metadata, and that's why the metadata, where it can be, should be open.
Great. Yeah, thank you very much. Yeah, I fully agree that you know, we definitely need provenance. We need transparency when AI is being utilized by any of the stakeholders within the research and science fields, and that we also need consent from the people who the data is being gathered from or gathered about, in order to use it for you know, for AI tools or AI solutions. So yes, fully agree with your comments. Thank you. Um, Jason, so I have a question for you, and I know you had mentioned that you know, and I think like all of us, you know, you're still very early in your AI journey and Gen AI journey, but I wanted to get your thoughts on you know, this one specific question. So you know, how can AI and bioinformatics ensure equitable representation of underrepresented communities um, in global biological data? And second part to that is, in you know, what safeguards can be implemented to prevent perpetual biases, especially in resource limited regions? So I mean, you know, I was wondering if what your thoughts were on that.
Probably AI can't do any of that stuff, because it's really up to us as researchers to be collecting that data in an equitable way, so that it could possibly generate a result that's representative. Um, I think actually, you know, in some ways, a different use where AI could be helpful is that that comes down to research practice. And I think the danger in the way that we practice science is that um, by necessity, because there's so much to learn, we're very focused and intensely focused on really specific research questions, and it makes it very easy to abstract away the implications of those questions in terms of ethics and society. And so it's very possible, right, to be a researcher, really focus on your question, think about things like the care principles, which were attempt to put a construct around how we should use practices in order to respect people's sovereignty over their data, for example. So to think that AI could help us alleviate that, no. But where it could help perhaps is, I think, if we are now in the mode being in this sort of millennial generation of using documentation and using LLMs to scan documentation as we're trying to do something, right? I do use GPT if I'm coding and I have a coding question. I'm like, oh, I don't want to read the NCBI manual. It's very obtuse. How do you do this? And it could tell me. But wouldn't it be beautiful if I can also go to the AI in terms of, as I'm designing a study, and be reminded of ethical considerations, and be reminded, or have a way, another tool. I don't know if it'll be any better than other ones that exist, but helping researchers as they're designing studies to consider and reflect on ethical and bias challenges that they may face, and point them to the literature where they could dive in. It's all about how do we. I'm afraid of the graduate students who are doing these things for the first time, receiving absolutely no guidance on this because the universe is so big. they may not have that mentor that's also guiding them through the strictly non-scientific components of things. So maybe AI is a solution to help us better get especially new practitioners in front of the frameworks that have already started to emerge, so that as they are doing their studies, they could be a little bit more sensitive and aware of the challenges that are a little bit bigger than their specific concern, particularly with ethics and bias.
Okay. Yeah, that's really interesting. I mean, I like the way you frame that, from saying, AI can't do it, but AI can be an assistant to the people who are actually doing the research and collecting the data, and kind of be more of a training tool versus actually doing the job for them, to point them in the right direction and keep them on track. So I really do like that line of thought and concept. Um, Alice, I know when we were planning this, you said, I'm not an expert in AI, and in all honesty, none of us are experts in AI, because it's evolving so rapidly, and new issues and new opportunities are popping up every day. But have you seen anything specific where AI's been used really well or responsibly, within this whole data collection or open data or open science ecosystem? And if you haven't, that's fine. But I just wanted to know if you have come across anything that said, that you felt was really interesting or really good.
I hate to say no. I think this shows my ignorance more than anything. I don't think I have seen anything specific. What I have seen, which I think is very encouraging, is a lot of work to try to develop better guidance, policies, decision making around this kind of thing, which I think hopefully sooner rather than later will lead to much better and more ethical data collection. I mean, I think to your point, Jason, a lot of the challenges around how the data is collected in the first place, and often research integrity issues are sort of highlighted at the very end of that process, at the publication point, rather than at the start. And now we're dealing with the fact that that's been the case, sometimes intentionally and sometimes unintentionally, in terms of data collection for decades, and not centuries at this point. So, if you think about something like some of the, terrible experiments that were undertaken, particularly on people of colour in the US, for example, in the early part of the 20th century and beyond. And that data was collected without permission, and was actually, the people involved weren't informed at all that they were even, part of this experiment. So we have a legacy of unethical data collection, I think. You see this also with gender distinctions in health collection. A lot of research, for example, in the news at the moment, is about how women's heart attacks manifest differently, and they aren't treated as well as, or as promptly as men's are, because all the research has been done on men having heart attacks. So I think we have a sort of legacy issue there which needs to be addressed, but also to your point, Jason, starting to address that at the point of collection in future or going forward, will be super important. And I think some of the sort of policies and guidelines that are being developed to encourage that will help. And I'm thinking of things like, reproducibility, encouraging people to make sure that their experiments are reproducible from the start, rather than sort of reversing into a hypothesis after collecting the data. So sorry, I'm not sure whether that really answered your question, Jay, but I think I personally don't think I could say I'm aware of something that's really been done spectacularly well, but I do think there are a lot of efforts to improve from the beginning of the process, which I think will help enormously.
I wanted to underline something you say by the unintentional, which is that the key insight is that you don't have to intend harm in to actually do that harm. You
Right.
may go in having all the great intentions in the world, and yet you still did result in harm.
Yes.
And so that's what we have to really be careful of, because AI could potentially amplify that.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yep. Those are really good points. And yeah, I mean, a few things that have come up when I've talked about AI with other folks or presented about AI has been this concept of ethics, governance, and especially the amplification of biases, because if we like it or not, we as humans have our own biases, and sometimes those are reflected in the research that we publish or the writings that that we produce. And then with AI, it can't really tell what's good or bad. It sees everything on the same level playing field, so it treats everything the same. Even if we as humans might know, like, hey, no, this is actually wrong or this is unethical. AI doesn't have that sort of mechanism built in to actually judge that. Um, so I definitely agree that we do need better policies in place. We also need to make sure that people are involved throughout that full process. Um, so, talking about AI, and Ed, I'm a big fan of Crossref. I know there are a lot of other folks who are fans of Crossref, and it's used very widely when it comes to developing research tools of all different flavors. Um, but from where you sit, have you? One of the questions that came in, and this is a question that I get asked also, is uh, have you seen or do you know that of unpublished works being used to train AI, um, and not just unpublished work, but maybe we can also talk a little bit, and if you can, maybe your thoughts on copyright, because that's a really important concept within publishing, and within academia. So have you seen or heard of unpublished works, copyrighted works being used for AI training, and what are your thoughts on that?
Wow, AI and copyright, that's a big topic. But yeah, so I think there's a few issues there, and I think that yeah, what's interesting is that for the big tech companies, who are using AI, OpenAI and Anthropic and Google, of course, and Amazon and others, they're just ingesting and hoovering up all this content. So, it's not clear what they're including, but they're including a lot of stuff out on the web. They'll pick up open access content, open data, I would assume, as well. But there's no way to verify that. But they're more specialized applications that are being used, where they're actually focusing on scholarly content, and so they might use the open metadata from Crossref data site and others, OpenAlex, and specifically focus on scholarly material, and that's actually starting to be used for um, research integrity checks. So AI can be used to generate fake papers, fake data, but on the other hand, it can also be used to identify it. So I think there are a couple of areas there where definitely stuff's getting picked up, anything on the web, preprints, but it's still not clear whether what the copyright status is. There was just a letter released from many artists and creative people, saying that they feel that it is violating copyright. Some of the things that are being done to train these AI LLMs, I guess, in particular, large language models. And but it's going to go in the U.S. It'll go through the courts, because is it fair use under copyright law? Possibly, but I don't know. I've read differing opinions on that. So I think that's still unclear. But in the meantime, there are some of the bigger commercial scholarly publishers who are signing deals and getting money for letting companies, with OpenAI, I assume, maybe, and Microsoft and others, to use their content for training AI models. And I assume these deals also include these companies being able to use it for their own, uh, systems and workflows. So there's a mix of things going on there, that and it's still not clear, how some of this will get sorted out.
Yeah, great. I don't know if Alice or Jason, if either of you had any thoughts on this, but please feel free to share.
Well, I think there was comment that the legal structures exist. If you, at least for I know for OpenAI, if you're not using a paid account, right? Um, if people can verify that or not. I haven't personally done it, so I don't want to advertise that I have. But I would say that if a legal structure in the usage agreement of any particular AI allows a particular type of thing to happen, then I should just assume that it's happening. And so that becomes a challenge when you talk about unpublished work, right? People with like their grant proposals and or grant reviews, which NIH had to early come out with a statement saying that you're not allowed to do that. So yeah, I'm unfortunately I would say guilty until proven innocent. If they've already come up with a legal usage agreement that allows that to happen.
Yep. Right. Alice, did you have any insights into this that you wanted to share?
I mean, not on the copyright side, I don't think. I would say, so I think publishers have a strong role to play here in terms of peer-reviewed content and authoritative content, and making sure that it is flagged as such, or if it's preprint content, that people know it's preprint content. So I think publishers have an important quality control role here. I don't know whether I think it's a good thing that some of the large publishers are getting into bed with the likes of Google on this or not really. I think certainly there are some concerns on the parts of their authors about this, and some of them have, got into trouble for that. So I think we're very far from having this situation resolved in a way that works for everybody, the content creators through to the content distributors. So yeah.
Yeah, great. No, that's a very interesting point. I do know that there's a lot of quite a few lawsuits out there against these companies, both from creators as well as from publishers. And of course, there are publishers out there who are striking these deals to make their data available, or make their data available, and to build AI tools for their own platforms with the likes of Microsoft. Those deals are happening, and more of those deals are happening um, as we wait on the courts to kind of weigh in on fair use and copyright and those sorts of protections. But hopefully within 2025, once we're through the elections here in the U.S. and some other places, we're able to actually pass some of these laws that'll help protect creators and their work, their IP, as well as copyright, and bring some balance into into the current system.
Could I
Um,
comment? Could I
yes,
comment?
yes, yes.
Do we want to cede that to the courts? Yes, at some point, if the court becomes involved, then you have no choice. But I think it speaks to the responsibility of the community to really speak up for and advocate for governance and policy, especially around open science and open access, to really ensure those things and create environments in which those things can flourish and be sustainable, so that we maybe avoid uh, going into legal battles if we can try to make sure that everyone's playing nicely. And that's a big responsibility. It probably takes sacrifice because it means researchers would have to uh, not send their work to people that are not playing nicely. But that's also another strategy that means, why should we cede that to a court that doesn't know anything about these particular topics? How can we as community members create that environment and really allow it to flourish?
Yeah, great. And you must have read my mind, Jason, because I was going to ask, kind of walking a little bit further away from AI, and I was going to ask all three of you if you could share, your insights on how can researchers, publishers, and institutions collaborate to create more robust ethical frameworks for data sharing? So, as Jason mentioned, the whole idea of community. I mean, how can the community collaborate, uh, to establish more ethical frameworks for data sharing? So, I don't know if you wanted to go ahead and start, Alice, with that.
Sure. I mean, I think the brief answer is that the community already is collaborating. I think there's quite a lot of great examples of that. Jason, you mentioned the CARE principles, which are the principles around the sharing of Indigenous knowledge. which are out there. They're fantastic. I don't know how widely they're being used. There's also the FAIR principles, which I mentioned earlier again, which is more sort of general principles around data, making data findable, accessible, interoperable and reusable. There are standards organisations like NISO, where I used to work, which bring all elements of the community together to try to develop standards and recommended practices around these sorts of issues.
I think, Alice, I think your audio just cut out. Still can't hear you. No. All right. So sorry about that, Alice.
I could try to pick up where she might have left off, which
Yes.
is the
Yes.
idea that
Please do, Jason. Yeah.
the community is already doing this, right? So probably what has been missing is sort of institutionalizing these frameworks and incentivizing them, because essentially there's a small bubble at any given university of people who are really passionate and knowledgeable about them, and not enough researchers early on in their training that are being exposed to these principles and also given roadmaps on how to implement them. To a certain extent, infrastructures, I think, are very much aware of these things and trying to create infrastructures that will make it very easy uh, for um, for these things to happen. I'm remembering a figure which I won't quote, but I think it's from the Center for Open Science, and talking about that you have to create the ability for infrastructure to make certain things possible, and then you need to incentivize to make it practical, or you need to make it rewarding, et cetera. People have seen the graphic that I'm thinking of. Now it's up to the larger community and different levers of policymakers and funders and et cetera to really add some strength to the implementations of those frameworks by incentivizing them, giving people credit for using them, and also chiding people and saying, hey, wait a second, why does none of your work have a DOI? Or hey, wait a second, why aren't you making use of this particular thing? And that means changing norms. It's a process. It can't happen overnight. But I think we're heading there, and I think more people need to be aware of that so that they could participate. And we also have to be wary of when there are potentially conflicts of interest, in which not to completely say that there shouldn't be for-profit entities, but we need to be aware that there are different players who have different roles, and we need all of them to come into a structure and an agreement and a practice that ultimately benefits the sharing of scientific data in a way that's beneficial.
Ed, I didn't know if you wanted to weigh in.
Yeah, and just picking up, I guess, on a couple of points. I think then, the frameworks around when research data is being created is really important. But then Alice touched on also the metadata and identifiers as well, so that when it moves through to getting into a repository or being published, then those standards and the metadata around it are really, really important. And a couple of things just to mention quickly, I think that, and I'll put links to them in the chat, are make data count is an initiative that's DataCite runs with support from the Wellcome Trust and the Chan Zuckerberg Initiative, and they're creating a data citation corpus, and also looking at how to have better how institutions can put in place and have training. And as Jason mentioned, around standards and data management plans and data management and availability plans, which are really important. So I think that's important and a good thing. And then another really good thing is local contexts, which is looking at metadata around indigenous knowledge, because I think it's great if we can have all the metadata and the data identified and linked to and cited, but if it's not available in the first place, and if you can't create metadata for it, and if there aren't metadata standards, then it's almost the danger is, so on the one hand we're worried about AI, taking everything and kind of using it in not very good ways. But on the other hand, if things aren't available, then they're not discoverable, and can't be reused and built on by others. So that's local context is doing work on the metadata front for indigenous knowledge. So I've just put it in the chat, 2 links there.
Great, thank you very much. Yeah, so that brings me to a question. One of the things is a lot of associations and institutions as well as publishers are passing these AI policies. But I guess how do researchers kind of align with those policies, and where do they get the uh, I don't know if you're where they would get ethical approval for using AI within within their research. Is there any specific um, advice you can give on that, or guidance in on that? And it's this is open uh, to all three of you, whoever wants to answer that, because I know it's a growing concern as more and more publishers keep putting out policies and more institutions keep putting out policies that they might conflict with each other, but how does a researcher actually read it? So any sort of insight you can offer on that.
Apologies for dropping off. Hopefully my connection is better now.
Yes. Yes.
I will jump in, if I may, just to say, partly to continue, and thank you, Jason, for, I think, picking up on what I was saying before. I mean, I think you're absolutely right that there is a real challenge, and doesn't just apply to AI. There's, there tends to be an attitude that if one policy doesn't completely fit, let's develop a completely new one until we have this plethora of policies and guidelines and all the rest of it, which is doesn't really do anybody any favors, but particularly researchers who are on the receiving end of, whether it's a policy or a requirement. If every publisher or organization that they work with has something slightly different, it's incredibly I'm sure frustrating, but also confusing and difficult. So I personally think, again, that standards, community-driven standards, are the solution to this. And the bit that I would have added, I think, and apologies if you also said this, Jason, is that the community engagement part of this is incredibly important. So there's no point in developing a policy if you haven't A, brought your community along with you as you develop it, and B, made it easy for them to comply with it. And I think to a large extent, unfortunately, neither of those things are happening at the moment, but there are some initiatives in place to try to make things more standard. But I think for as long as organisations want to develop their own policies, it's, to me, I'm sorry to be a bit negative about it, but it seems very difficult to provide advice other than, I'm really sorry, you've got to go to the individual publisher's website and see what they are requiring you to do and try and comply with it, even if it's different from the last one or the one before that.
Yeah. I mean, eventually we might need to build a tool where we can just take all those policies and say, okay, make sense of it for me.
That would be, I'm sure there would be a lot of appetite for that, yes.
Great. Jason, Ed, I don't know if you guys have faced that or heard that, or if you have had some researcher come to you, or connect with you and say, hey, can you help me with this? I have no clue what any of these policies mean.
They don't generally. I mean, maybe they come to a librarian for some of that sometimes, but they don't generally, I think, because they don't even know that they're supposed to be complying. I think a large amount of them don't even know. I often teach workshops for graduate students, and I ask them about, what's their lab's data management plan or policy? Have they ever even heard of it or seen it? And none of them know it. Like no hand goes up pretty consistently from folks all around the country, around the world, which means, if you don't even know that you have a data management plan or policy in your lab, then how could you possibly be following it? So it's awareness building early on that I think needs to happen. What is good data hygiene? And then there needs to be a much greater application of the tools, so that there are people that want to be mindful about this, and that people do care once they're made aware of it. And so as long as we can make it not onerous, but really make it a part of everyday research practice the same way. I'm a bench person, so the way that you put gloves on when you come into the lab, that should be the instinct of how we're going to work with data, that we're following this data hygiene practice and they become natural to us.
Great. Thank you very much. Ed?
And just following on from that, I think then when it moves from that stage that you were describing, Jason, and then it moves into the publication process. I think then coordination between funders and institutions and journals can help there, because if they insist on particular policies, and for instance, if the journals that say, okay, put your data into Dryad, and then it's going to get identified and have metadata, and then that'll help with making it discoverable. So I think there are some things, but I think the challenge is the scale of it. And I went to a Make Data Count summit back in September, and they've been doing really good work, and trying to raise awareness about all of this. But even there, it was interesting to hear from institutions, from well-funded, well-resourced institutions in Europe and the US, still having trouble with this, still struggling, right? And it was difficult and it was hard. And so that just highlights the problem that, for organizations that are less well-resourced, it's even more of a challenge to do these things. So maybe, yeah, if there can be better tools and easier to use repositories and things like that, that can help. But I do think there's still a lot of hurdles around the data, because I think a lot of credit in the academic system is still reliant on publishing a journal article in a high impact factor journal, right? And so if you're not getting credit for the data and the data quality, but I think it has started to shift, partly because of research funders and institutions and publishers putting in place some of these things. But I guess there's a lot more to do.
Yeah, great, thank you. I guess besides AI and Gen AI, the other burning issue and something that's been keeping a lot of folks up at night, both in academia and publishing, has been this whole idea around research integrity. So, I definitely wanted to take this opportunity to ask, um, how do you see the increasing rate of retractions impacting the image of science globally? And realistically, how can universities regain trust and credibility in the academic environment? Um, Jason, if you wanted to maybe try and tackle that first, and then Alice, and then Ed.
I'm going to have my own sort of pet theory, which is, again, that it's not a technical challenge, but a social one. Um, I think actually this could be just naive or, my own personal wish. I think that as we get into a world where everything could be increasingly suspect for being fake or inauthentic, it's going to increase our need to have more real and authentic connections with our peers. Like actually knowing who my colleagues and collaborators are is going to be more important, because if I know personally who my colleagues are and work with them very closely, um, it's returned to how do we actually trust other people? How do we create mechanisms that we can actually trust our peers because we know their work and know it well, um, which maybe sacrifices a little bit of saying that any particular paper on the internet I can pick up and read and assume that it's true. Maybe that's just as naive as saying any sandwich that I find in the ground I can also pick up. Well, it's a sandwich. So I don't know the answer to your question. I just dream that um, as we are trying to solve it, we have to come back to how people actually work and how they interact with one another, and find ways to take existing frameworks, social frameworks for trust building and mutual benefit, and deploy those within academia, maybe make for better academia. Someone else might give a more technical answer because they exist, but I'll focus on that one.
All right, Alice.
Yeah, so I definitely agree with Jason about this being, I mean, I just think in general, change is mostly a social problem, and that you need the technology to facilitate it, but the technology shouldn't be driving the change, really. Um, it's a really interesting question. From the retractionist point of view, what I think is that, looking back, in many ways, institutions should have taken much more responsibility for research integrity. And not that they shouldn't do so now as well, but to the point that Jason made earlier, that needs to happen right from the start. It needs to be built in. Doing things the right way, ethically, needs to be built in from the start. And it isn't always. I think we all could share examples of where we know that's not to be the case. And then peer review at the publishing end was sort of the point of last resort, where any kind of challenges around the way the research had been conducted should have been picked up during peer review. And I think, honestly, to a large extent, they were. But peer review isn't perfect. I don't think anybody would claim that. But I think it was doing a lot of the work that needed to be done. But as things have become more complex, as more research is being published, that reliance on 2 or 3 people at the end of the process has become more challenged. But also, and this is a bit where I think the publishers bear more responsibility, because of this proliferation of paper mills and other sort of forms of, whether it's AI generated or what, sort of technical challenges that are not getting picked up by peer review. That's the bit where I think the publishers should take more responsibility. So I feel like at either end of the process now, we've got a problem. We've got a problem still, at least to some extent, at the institutional end, with researchers not necessarily being as well trained as they should be to conduct their research in an ethical and responsible way and reproducible way. And then at the other end, we've got this sort of awful pipeline of fake papers that are not being spotted as soon as they should be, and resulting in mass retractions. And both things, I think, are really impacting how we trust information and knowledge. And I say that at a personal level. I think this is what you were alluding to, Jason. I read stuff or look at stuff, I'm like, is that real? Is that a deep fake? Can I spot one? And I think we're all struggling with this challenge, but I think that research and academia has a particular responsibility in this sort of age of misinformation and disinformation to really do our best to get it right, so that we can deliver the content that people can know is trusted and is identified as trusted.
Great.
Yeah, I'll jump in there on the question of retractions. I guess I would say that retractions have gone up, and it's still a relatively small percentage. But I would say, to restore trust, I think there need to be more retractions, and they need to be happening more quickly. I agree with Alice that you want to catch it before publication and even farther along. But in the position where things are now, I think there has to be a process. That's how science works, right? Retractions and corrections, importantly, are part of that, and that is really important in terms of transparency as well. And so, just to put a plug in for a Retraction Watch, they're doing some great work, and Crossref has an agreement with them, full disclosure, and we make the retraction data available because it's really important to have that transparent. And there's still not perfect systems in place, because what would be great is that if something's retracted, then immediately anybody who's got it in their bibliography, anybody who's cited it, would be alerted. And that's starting to come. There's a good NISO standard out about corrections and retractions. But so I think we'll see a lot more work in that area. But we'll probably see retractions going up, and then hopefully going down, because publishers are investing a lot in research integrity. They're using tools, they're using technology, but actually they're hiring people. There are more people. They're actually increasing their teams and working with vendors on this. But again, it's really difficult, because there's just it's so easy now to create fake stuff, and so it's going to be a continuing challenge. And one of the figures I read recently was, there was a report saying, that over the next few years, something like $1 trillion was going to be invested in AI and LLMs and all this in this whole area. So I think that compared to that, the scholarly scientific world is relatively small. So to some extent, it's getting dragged along by these bigger trends in society. But I think there's still generally optimistic, because there's a lot of committed people, researchers, and publishers and librarians and funders and people who work in government, really trying to work on all of these things to make sure that there's good quality content and data.
I do think there's a big sort of public education component of this that's needed as well, though, because I think I don't disagree with you, Ed, about there do need to be more retractions, unfortunately, rather than less. And as you say, that's how science works. But I think the trouble is that misinformed and/or bad players use that as evidence that science is fake, basically. And so, I don't quite know how you square that circle, but I do think better public education about science, if there's a way to make that happen, would be really, really valuable. Teaching people how to understand how science works, how the review process works, and how to identify what content they can trust versus what they should be more suspicious of.
Great, thank you very much. I know we're getting to nearly the end of time, so before I ask one more question, I just wanted to put this up for our attendees. So we do have an exclusive offer for all Open Access Week 2024 participants. If you want, take a screenshot, write down this coupon code, but it's a 10% off on Editage services, except for PaperPal and Mind the Graph. So, please do go ahead and take a screenshot or write that code down. And we'll also post this in the chat. Great. So my last question was really, I do know all three of you volunteer a lot of your time to a lot of good causes, and to helping further science and open science and open data. If you wanted to just maybe mention one of the organizations you work for, I think that would be really great. And if you want to maybe share a link to that organization in the chat, so our participants can check it out and see, if there are resources that they can utilize, or if they would want to participate in those organizations or lend a hand. I think that'd be really great. So, Alice, I'll start with you.
It's like asking me to name my favorite child. Can I cheat slightly and have two?
Sure.
One of which is the Society for Scholarly Publishing, SSP, which I know Cactus is a member of. I'm a member of. I think Crossref is a member of. It's a great, completely political, so neutral in terms of business model. It's not a lobbying organisation, and it's a very inclusive organisation for anybody who's involved in any way in scholarly publishing, from any function, any type of organisation, and it's a really wonderful place to volunteer. I've been involved for about 15 years at this point. I served as president a couple of years ago. It's really, I can't recommend it highly enough. And then the other is C4DISC, which is the Coalition for Diversity and Inclusion in Scholarly Communications, which has been going again for about 5 years or so, I should think, and is intended to bring together organisations from around the scholarly communications world to try to address some of the challenges that we have around diversity and inclusion. One of the things that we have done, which I think people might find helpful, is we've published a series of toolkits, anti-racism toolkits, equity toolkits. So I will pop the links to both of those in the chat. But, oh, thank you. I can see SSP's already in there. Anyway, those are the two of the places I volunteer for that I feel very passionate about and strongly encourage you to take a look at.
Great, thank you. Jason?
Sure, thank you. I'm here for today's invitation came to me from Dryad through that network. And so, yes, I've been volunteering for them. It's a generalist repository data publication platform. So it is a place for researchers to put their data and for that data to be curated with the intention that we don't want to just be the repository where data comes to die, but we want to be a repository where valuable data is actually checked by expert curators and is made available with the knowledge that people reusing that data can have some understanding of its value. So I'll stop there and hope that people take a look.
Great. And last but not least, Ed.
Yeah, thanks. Just to say, C4 Disc, which Alice mentioned, is a great initiative, and I was on the steering group with that for a while, and they're doing really good work. And I mentioned a few things already during this session, but I guess one final thing is just the Principles of Open Scholarly Infrastructure is a group of organizations, who've adopted a set of principles, because I think open data and open metadata, but also sustainable and well-governed open infrastructure is really critical to open science globally. And so I think we Crossref supports it, but I also personally support it.
Great. Well, thank you very much. I know we're at the end of time, but so thank you, Ed, Alice, Jason, for joining us and sharing your insights and expertise. Thank you for all of the participants who attended. I hope you learned something new, got something out of this session, and were able to get some of your questions answered. Let's try and continue this conversation on social media. I wish you all a very good rest of your week. We're almost at Friday, so that's a cause for celebration. But have a good day. Thank you for attending. Take care.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye.